Very cool. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Arin Underwood. I'm with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, as Chelsea said. And today I was going to talk about Alaska's bat species. So, for a little overview of what I was going to talk about, I was going to talk a bit about the program that I work with at Fish and Game. We call it the TED program. It's the Threatened, Endangered, and Diversity program. And then go into the order of bats, which is Chiroptera, kind of a little bit of a bird's eye view of them as an order, what makes them unique, why they're interesting. And then their general ecology, and then zoom in a bit to the bats that we have here in Alaska, specifically the little brown bat, because they're the most common. And then some of the research that's been done on bats here in Alaska and that is still currently going on. And then what you can do if you find a bat in your backyard, which does happen every summer. And then how you can be a bat supporter in other ways. And then hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end. All right, so getting into the TED program. So, like I said, that's the Threatened, Endangered, and Diversity Program. We are statewide. We have folks in Fairbanks, Juneau, and Anchorage, and we work with species of greatest conservation need, or SGCN. And so we essentially do research, education, conservation action, and then review listings for the Endangered Species Act, or the ESA. And the SGCN, I'll kind of get into what that is in the next slide, but some of the animals in this photo are examples of SGCN. We have the less yellow legs in the upper right there, golden eagle on the upper left, collared pike on the bottom left, and then our collared pika team on the bottom right there. So the SGCN, that's another one, that's the olive-sided flycatcher. These are species that would be considered at risk, as in their population is declining or at risk from something else. So the flycatcher, for example, has had a big declines in the last few decades. The shorebird from the previous slide, they've had almost a 90% decline. And the little brown bat has also had a decline. Its eastern populations on the east coast of the United States have gone down quite a bit for reasons I'll go into during the talk. And then also stewardship species. So these are species where a majority of their breeding population or global population is found in Alaska. So that would be endemic species that are only found here, such as the Alaska hare, and then also species where most of their breeding population is here, such as the trumpeter swan. And then also sentinel species. These are kind of the canary in the coal mine species, where they're indicators of environmental change, which bats are often that. It's because they're usually slow to have their population grow, which makes them kind of sensitive to changes in the environment, like temperature or anything with like their water source. So kind of keeping an eye on these indicator species is a good way to judge the health of the rest of the ecosystem and kind of get that early warning sign. So these are all species that it's good to keep an eye on and monitor, get more research for, and write conservation action for, with our ultimate goal of keeping common species common and everything at sustainable levels. So, Chiroptera, that is the order of bats. And I've got a lot of funky bat photos here in the next few slides because these guys are kind of they're kind of funky. There's a lot of different kinds of them. They come in all different shapes and sizes. There's about 1,500 species of bat in the world. That for context, that is about 20% of all mammal species on Earth. So they are a large portion of the mammals. They're the second largest order of mammals. The first largest order is rodents, which has about 2,000 species. And a lot of them are kind of research deficient. We don't know a huge amount about all of these different kinds of bats. We're finding new species every year. It was only a couple years ago that the number everyone had settled on for a species of bat in the world was 1,400, and it was just this year that we got a notification that like, oh, actually, it's probably closer to 1,500. So it's just kind of constantly changing, which is pretty interesting. And they are pretty widely distributed as far as mammals go as well. They're the most widely distributed kind of land-bound mammal in the world. And their Greek name, or their scientific name, Chiroptera, it comes from Greek, and it means hand wing. And this picture kind of helps demonstrate that. So you can kind of see this is the bones. They're all the same color where they're kind of similar. So you can see for humans, the orange and red are going to be our hand bones, and that's similar in bird wings and in the bat wing. And it's kind of unsettling, but if you if you imagine that the fingers in your hands elongated until they were about as long as you are tall, and they had like a membrane between them and that you flew with it, that is essentially what a bat wing is. So that's why they're called a hand wing. And that's another example of their skeleton. You can kind of see essentially what I just described. So that's where that comes from, which is pretty interesting because they are the only mammal in the world that's capable of true flight. Every other mammal that can, fly like a flying squirrel, it's really more like gliding. It's not actual flight, which is probably one of the reasons that they are so diverse and have so many species. Similar to birds, have 10,000 species or so in the whole world, and a big part of that is because they can fly, and so they can kind of just go long distances and sort of isolate their populations enough for them to change. So, I always like talking about these guys. These are kind of demonstrate the diversity of bats that we have in the world. So we have the biggest bat in the world on the left there. That's the giant golden crowned flying fox. They have about, on the big side, 6 foot wingspan, and they weigh about 3 pounds. They are a fig specialist, so they're only going to eat figs, and they live in the Philippines. So they're going to mostly just roost in trees and eat fruit and leaves and things like that. And then the smallest bat in the world is on the right there. Its cute name is the bumblebee bat. Its less cute name is, I think, oh, what was it? It's the hog-nosed bat, I think, is its less cute name. These guys are about a 6 inch wingspan. They measure about 1 inch long and they only weigh 2 grams as a full-grown adult. And they eat beetles, spiders, and flies, and they're found in limestone caves around Thailand. So that's just the, 6 foot wingspan to 6 inch wingspan just kind of shows the diversity of bat morphology in the world. And it's kind of wild to think about. It's pretty interesting. So I mentioned that these guys are fig eaters, and that guy's a little insect eater. So most bats are going to be insect eaters. We have about 47 or so species of bat in the United States, and almost all of them are going to be insect eaters. I think there's only like maybe two that migrate up from Mexico that technically drink nectar sometimes. So the next big portion of bats are going to be nectar drinkers and fruit eaters. And then a tiny portion are going to be more predatory. They're going to hunt frogs and lizards, other bats, things like that. And there's only 3 species of vampire bat in the world, and all of them are in Central and South America. And those guys are pretty tiny. So, in general, most bats are going to be insect eaters. And if you see a bat that kind of looks like the flying fox there, that they have that kind of long, flying fox type face, and they maybe look a little bit more cuter, they kind of look like more like a dog. They're most likely going to be the fruit eaters because they can be that size. They can be bigger and kind of go after flowers and things like that. And then all of the tiny bats that look, not as cute. I mean, I think they're cute, but some people don't think they're as cute. They have like kind of weird little smushed faces and big ears, things like that. Those are all going to be the insect eaters. And the reason for that is because of echolocation. And this is how the insect eaters are going to hunt. So this is kind of a suborder called the microbats. The macrobats are going to be the bigger flying fox bats. And these guys work by bouncing their sound waves off of prey. And the way I like to think about it is if you imagine that you have a basketball and you're kind of bouncing it on a tile floor, and then you bounce it on a carpet. And like even me just saying that, you can kind of imagine how it sounds differently. There's like going to be a muted sound on the carpet, and there's going to be like a louder, sharper sound on the tile. And then if you throw the basketball across a gym and it hits a wall, it'll take like 2 seconds to cross the room, depending on how far away the wall is. And so all of that gives you information just by the sound, even if you don't really, register it. But you can tell. It'd be like, oh, the ground is soft, or that wall is very far away. And all that information is stuff that bats do the same thing, but to a much higher degree of accuracy. They can find like exactly where a moving insect is, even as it's flying around, how big it is, what kind it is, anything like that. It kind of looks like that, where they'll send the yellow sound at the bug, and then it'll kind of reflect back, and that's how they can find them with no light. And it's really, really accurate. They are excellent flyers with this echolocation. I think I was in California one summer and I was doing owl surveys, and I remember I was out there and I had a headlamp on, and so all of these insects were flying around my head because they were attracted to the headlamp. And bats started swarming around me to eat the insects, and one of them flew like straight at my face, and then its sonar like picked me up at the last second, and it made this like hairpin turn. Its wing kind of like brushed against my face, so it kind of saw me like at the last possible second and turned. So they're really pretty accurate with the echolocation. It's very cool. And that's why they are nocturnal and able to survive at night because they don't need light to see. So I've mentioned the diversity of bats a little bit. I love these photos. These are just some photos by Merlin Tuttle's organization. He's a very pioneering bat biologist. And he's been photographing a lot of these guys over the last few decades. And like I said, there's just so many species. They've been around for a very long time. The order is about 50, 60 or so million years old. And they've just diversified so much. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. They are found in the Arctic Circle. They're found in the tropics, just all over the place. We've got, I think that's the hammerhead bat, that big guy in the middle there, and they kind of use that big nose of theirs to like make these like huge echoing calls. We have those little fluffy white bats with the yellow ears, and that little fruit bat in the bottom right there. So anyway, they're just a very interesting, unique order of mammals, and there's not really anything else like them, and it's pretty cool. But since they've been around for so long and they're everywhere, there's a lot of misconceptions about them. A lot of people think that they're blind, which is probably comes from the fact that they do use echolocation in the dark. But actually, no bats are blind. All species of bat can see, and they can actually see pretty well. They don't need it to hunt, but it is useful for the rest of their lives. They have a little bit of a bad reputation because they're out at night and they're hard to see, and they have, little leathery wings that people think that they're scary or that they are going to attack you or get caught in your hair. So they don't do that. Bats aren't naturally aggressive. They're healthy bats never going to attack a human. If they do get close to your head, it's usually because like your head's going to give off a lot more heat than the rest of your body, and that might attract insects, like I was doing in California with my headlamp. So if a bat does kind of fly around your head, it's probably just because it's going after some insects around your head or something like that. But they're never going to like be interested in you, like the bats that were swarming around me in California. Like I might as well have been a tree for all the attention they paid me. And they also have, people are kind of afraid that they might have rabies. And I'll go into that a little bit at the end when I talk about what to do when you find a bat. So essentially, it is not impossible. Most people who have gotten rabies in the US historically have gotten it from a bat, but it is very, very unlikely. I think it's on average is about 1.5 people per year in the entire continent get rabies from a bat, and it's only if you handle it. So if you're in a situation where you never handle bats, the chances are zero. So I think about fewer than 1% of the bats that are tested in the US for rabies have ever been positive. And we've been testing for rabies in bats in Alaska for about 50 years, and there's only been 6 cases of rabies detected in bats. All of them were in the southeast, and none of them have ever been recorded north of that, and none of them have ever transmitted it to a human. So it's technically possible, but it is very, very unlikely. So I just like to say that. All right. So I mentioned that bats were kind of an indicator of ecosystem health, or a bioindicator is another way to call it. And so this is kind of a list of the things that bats are like their positive impact on the environment and on people. So the fruit eating and nectar drinking bats, they're all going to be pollinators and seed dispersers. So they're going to act kind of like a bee or a butterfly. They're going to pollinate different flowers. They're going to act like a bird in that they will carry seeds from fruit into new areas and help with vegetation growth. They're the insect-eating bats or the insectivorous bats. They are a major source of natural pest control. They actually did a study on this a couple years ago, where they were looking at the value of insectivorous bats to the United States agriculture industry. And I think they calculated that insectivorous bats here save farmers about $23 billion a year by reducing crop damage and controlling the pests. And then they are also the bioindicator of environmental change. So they're really important to the environment, and they're kind of a key part of all these different ecosystems. And there's actually a couple of plants that are only pollinated by bats, and if it wasn't for bats, then these specific species of plant probably wouldn't survive. And this is actually used in outreach quite a bit because one of those plants is the agave, which relies on bats for pollination, and that's where tequila comes from. So that's kind of a popular topic of outreach. I think bananas as well. Bananas rely a lot on bat pollination. And one of the examples I like to give for the pest control is this cave in Texas. If anyone has visited here, I'd love to visit here someday. I believe it's the biggest congregation of mammals other than humans in the world, and it's Bracken Cave, and it has about 20 million bats living in it. And they eat about an estimated 100 to 200 tons of insects every single night. And one bat there can eat enough corn ear moss to prevent 20,000 eggs from being laid in the crops. So that's just in like one night, you know? So that's kind of just like a snapshot of how valuable, like even that just one cave of bats is to the area around Bracken Cave. So they're very interesting and very old and very unique and useful little order of mammals. So, zooming in to the bats that we have here in Alaska, we have about seven species listed here. That's the western long-eared bat, the hoary bat, long-legged myotis, California myotis, Yuma myotis, silver-haired bat, and the little brown myotis, also known as the little brown bat. I keep saying myotis, and that is a genus of bats, and it literally means mouse ears. So you can kind of see all these little bats are going to have these kind of tiny little ears. So that's why they're called that. They're kind of interchangeably called little brown myotis, little brown bat, and their scientific name is Myotis lucifugus. So that's where that comes from. And I'm focusing on the little brown bat because they are the most common species in Alaska. They are the most widespread. If you see a bat in Alaska, no matter where you are in the state, it's almost always going to be a little brown bat. Technically, those other six species can be seen in the southeast. That's why I included them. But if you're not in the southeast and you see a bat, it's almost certainly going to be a little brown. I think technically silver-haireds have come up to Anchorage like a couple times in the past, and there was like a report of a big brown bat one time. But in general, it's usually just going to be the little brown. And these guys are pretty small. They have about a 8-inch wingspan. But interestingly, the little brown bat, but then also bats in general, like all bats, have pretty long lifespans. They're going to live 35 to 40 years. I think the oldest bat in the world is maybe a fruit bat that's like 42 years old or something like that. So even though they kind of like look like mice or rodents and they're, that small, they have a wildly different lifespan. I mean, a mouse's average lifespan is like maybe 3 years old. And so these guys just live a very long time. And they only have one pup a year, also different from rodents. And their reproduction rate is like, not too far off from like a bear, like a much bigger mammal. So it's just another interesting thing about them. But these little guys, they can fly up to about 22 miles an hour or so. If you see them kind of flying around your house, they're probably flying about 12 miles an hour, but they can travel 10 kilometers or so in a night from their roost looking for places to feed. So I usually tell people who wonder if they have bats in their backyard, if you're within 10 kilometers of like a lake or a slow-moving river, then you probably do. They are found all over the state. So this is a map showing the range of little brown bat. On the left in green, you can see that they're coast to coast, Mexico to the Arctic Circle. They are just found all over the continent. And on the map on the right, this is from a paper published by Fish and Game in 2014 that kind of depicts a lot of the reports that people have made of bats. And these are all credible reports that have been checked out. And the black dots are going to be observations of little brown bats. And you can see that there's even one up in Kotzebue above the Arctic Circle. And there's other bat species in Eurasia that have also been seen above the Arctic Circle. So that's not unusual to see them up there. And these are going to be a little bit biased towards where the people are. So there's a lot more reports in Anchorage just because there's a lot more people in Anchorage who are able to report them. So that's also what's kind of interesting about studying bats in Alaska is that the research here is kind of new and there's still a lot that we don't know about bats in Alaska, mostly because we're not able to cover all the ground. We have a huge state. We have so much habitat. So it's kind of, developing. We're kind of finding new things out all the time and there's still a lot of unanswered questions. So it's pretty interesting to be a part of. So life up here for bats is a little bit different than the bats in the lower 48 or even in the tropics. As we all know, it gets really dark in winter, it's really light in the summer, it's cold all winter. So in the summer, when the bats are out, they are going to have a much shorter foraging time. They do not like being out when it's light because then owls can see them. Owls are going to be one of their main predators. And that's one of the reasons why they hunt at night. It's mostly to kind of hide from predators, as well as they don't have to compete with birds for insects. So there's also a lot of open space. There's not as much tree cover, especially out on more tundra areas where there's not as much forest. The winters are longer and colder. And on the East Coast, you're going to see bats kind of roosting in these big caves and huge areas like that. And Alaska doesn't really have a lot of that. We have like a couple of mine shafts, but it's not like reliable. So there's kind of a seemingly lack of hibernation or roosting spots. And the way that they deal with a lot of this is they hibernate through the winter. So they are hibernating right now, but as we're in March, they're kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if some places around the state, they were kind of starting to wake up. Usually, like late March, early April is when the bats kind of start emerging from hibernation. And then by May, they are out on the landscape and they are looking for places to roost and raise their pups. And it's pretty cool how they get into hibernation. So it's called torpor, the state when an animal will kind of lower its heart rate, lower its breathing, and sort of go into this hibernation states. So when a little brown bat is flying out in the summer, its heart can beat 1,000 times per minute, and when it's hibernating, its heart will only beat about 20 times per minute. And for reference, a regular human heart will beat about 60 to 100 times per minute. And then they'll only breathe maybe one breath every 47 minutes or so. And this is in freezing temperatures. So they really just go on like low battery mode to survive the winter. And they're going to go into hibernation around October. And then, like I said, kind of wake up around the end of March. So, kind of soon, because it's kind of soon. And I like this picture because this kind of demonstrates, what we already know about Alaska is the light hour. This is a bat box that is occupied in south central Alaska, and this is me and our wildlife tech Lucy here, and we are counting the bats that come out of it. And it's 11:30 p.m., and as you can see, it's completely bright out, and an owl could see a bat no problem. So that's one of the the challenges for them. Like I said, the adaptations that they have here are hibernation in the winter. They also do something called gleaning. And gleaning is when they, instead of catching an insect on the wing in the air, they'll sort of pluck it off of vegetation or the ground. So if there's a spider that's sitting on the ground, or if there's a beetle on a leaf, the bat will swoop down and kind of pluck it off of the ground and that or the leaf, and that's called gleaning, as opposed to I think hawking is what it's called when they catch the insects on the wing. And the bats in the north, most bats do this, but the bats in the north might be more likely to do it because it's a spider has a lot more benefit to it than like a tiny little mosquito. It's going to have a lot more calories. So if they have a shorter foraging time because of our light, they can kind of get more bang for their buck by going after bigger things like that. So that's another thing that they do to kind of adapt to the north. And then we also think that they've been taking advantage of what we call anthropogenic resources, which is basically just human-related resources, so cabins and houses and sheds and things like that. And so in nature, they might roost or hibernate in like an old dead tree or a big pile of roots. In Juneau, they hibernate in the rocky ridges around the coast. And we haven't found any hibernation sites outside of the southeast. And part of this is because, we do find them roosting in human cabins and things like that. But then part of it is kind of like, even if the bats are roosting in trees, you're much more likely to find them in your cabin because that's where the humans are. So maybe they are using all these natural resources, and it's just much harder to find them like that. So there's like, a little bit of a discovery bias there versus what are they actually doing. So that's something that we're still kind of looking into. But as far as we know, bats will not hibernate in any heated homes because they need that cold temperature to kind of kickstart their hibernation. So bats shouldn't be hibernating in any houses that people are staying in through the winter usually. So I've kind of talked a little bit about their life. I kind of wanted to show this graph that sort of illustrates. their activity and what they do during the year. So you can see on the bottom axis there, that's the date. So we start here on March 10th, which is just about a week ago. And then it goes all the way into November. So you can see this green line is bat activity. So this axis here, you see average acoustic files recorded per site. So we have little microphones that we put out, and as a bat flies past it, it'll kind of count its chirping calls because they chirp when they hunt so that they have sound to bounce off the insects. And so you can usually pick them up on the microphones when they're out flying around because they're always hunting when they're out flying around. So this green line just kind of shows the number of bat calls that are getting picked up, which is reflective of their activity and how many bats are out on the landscape. So you can see here, this is April 7th, and this is when the bats start piping up on the landscape. So these bats came out of hibernation right at the end of March, beginning of April. And they start to look for a maternity roost. All the females do. The males kind of go off and do their own thing. They don't really congregate as much. They might just do like a couple of bats here and there. But the females will form these big maternity roosts that have 200 bats or so. It can get up to like 1,000 bats. On the East Coast, it'll be thousands of bats. It'll be like 5,000 bats. But the Alaskan bats do not congregate as much as the East Coast bats, which is interesting. And I'll get into why that's actually kind of good for them in the long run in a couple of slides. And so then the activity kind of goes up a little bit more. These are the female bats. They've moved into their roost and they are foraging, and they're going to have their pups. That's going to be one for each, and the pups just going to kind of hold on to them. They're like the size of your thumb. They're very cute. And then July here, you see this big spike. And this is when the pups learn how to fly and they begin to forage on their own. So the population on the landscape essentially doubles because you had all these tiny little baby bats suddenly going out with their mothers. And so there's, if you're going to be recording bats anywhere, there's almost always going to be a spike in July for that reason. And that also means that there's a spike at Fish and Game and people calling me and saying that they have bats in their house because the baby bats are terrible at flying and they end up in silly places. They'll, come into people's cabin windows and, not be able to find the door again. So usually when I hear people finding bats and wondering what to do, it's around July and it's usually a juvenile bat who is lost and doesn't know what they're doing and is not a very good flyer. So as we get into August and September, the bat activity will kind of decline. The bats are looking for hibernation sites. And then usually by October, almost all of them have gone into hibernation and it's quiet on the landscape again. So well, I guess I'm just thinking about some of the stats for the pups. The pups will, yeah, they'll kind of like emerge, like in July, like I said. But it takes them like 2 months of gestation, and then they nurse for about 3 weeks. So that's kind of what they're doing during this whole springtime. So that's what's coming up right now. So there's a couple of threats to little brown bats. This is what I mentioned in the beginning. The reason that they are considered a species of greatest conservation need or an SGCN is because of these threats. And this is what has been declining a lot of populations on the East Coast. So the top one is white nose syndrome, also called WNS. And I'll get into this in the next slide, but this is what has been decimating the East Coast little brown bats. It has about like a 98% mortality rate. It's pretty bad. And then in general, there's some kind of development and habitat loss, habitat changes, if they lose any foraging areas, things like that. And bats are, like I said, they're pretty slow to reproduce. They're some of the slowest for their size in the whole world. And almost every species in the world is going to have like one pup a year. I think that's pretty standard for bats. So any of these like threats or changes will hit them harder than it might hit something that has a faster reproduction rate. So white nose syndrome, this is what it looks like. It's just kind of what it sounds, or it looks like what it sounds like. This is an invasive fungus from Europe that got introduced on the East Coast in 2006, I think. New York is when it was first detected. And it's now been confirmed in nearly half of all hibernating bat species in North America, and it's pretty widespread across the continent. Up here in Alaska, it has not gotten here yet. It has never been reported in Alaska, but it is kind of creeping our way from Canada, so it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on. I think it was found in Seattle in 2016, so it's definitely making its way up here. And the eastern little brown bat populations have declined by about 90% since this got introduced. So it's kind of the biggest concern in the North American bat community at the moment. And the way that it hurts bats, like I said, it's caused by a fungus. We call it PD for short because it has a pretty long name. But it looks like this white fuzz on the bat's face and wings, and it affects them when they're hibernating. So when a bat is hibernating, they kind of have to stay in that state because coming out of it burns a lot of energy. And the fungus, which causes the white nose syndrome, essentially makes them like wake up from hibernation, and then they go back, and then they wake up, and then they go back, and it just burns through all of their resources. So they end up dying of dehydration, basically, is how it affects them. And here is a map of this. So you can kind of see the purple and the blue is in the past, kind of a longer ago. So that's like 2006, 2009, that kind of thing. It's all kind of centered on the East Coast here. As we get into 2010, 2012, you see it's kind of spreading a little bit north, a little bit west. And then we get up to like 2018, 2019, and it's being reported in Washington and over here. So this graph ends in 2019, as you can see, but this graph goes into 2023, and you can see that now it's creeping farther into Canada, and it's just kind of making its way west. So it hasn't been found, up here in Alaska or like past this one area in BC, but it is definitely something that we're keeping our eye on because it affects bats, and especially little brown bats, so much. So that's just one of the major concerns that we have here. And every now and again, I will go out and I will test the colonies that I know in Alaska and just make sure that none of them have an indication of white nose syndrome, which we haven't found yet, but it's good to keep testing. So we do the white nose testing here, and what else do we do in Alaska? So this is some of the research that's been going on. That's Tori in this picture here. She worked down in Southeast, and that is her conservation dog, Jack, who she trained to sniff out bat hibernation sites. So in the Southeast, they did just wrap up a lot of their bat projects because our team there retired. But they were looking for the hibernacula or the hibernation sites of bats, and they were doing some kind of general monitoring with those microphones that I mentioned from the graph, where they just kind of listen for the bat hunting calls. And then I'm part of the South Central team. I say team, it's mostly just me. And I'm doing the same kind of monitoring where I'll put down the microphones out across the South Central area, and I'll kind of mail them out to a lot of volunteers. And people will host these microphones throughout the summer, and it kind of gives me a picture of when the bats are emerging from hibernation, when they're going back in, and then a general idea of their activity. It's not, you have to be kind of careful where you place them if you want to get something like a population count. But if you're just kind of looking for their emergence and their presence, then it's pretty good for that. And then we also have a bat report form. If you ever see or find a bat, even if it's just flying around, you just see it for a second, you can go to the Fish and Game Living with Bats page, and we have a bat report form that'll just ask where and when you saw it and what it was doing, and that kind of helps us keep track of bat activity across the state. And then we also do the white nose testing. And there's a website called Northern Bat Research that kind of summarizes some of what's going on. So this doesn't have the Anchorage in it stuff, but I do have some monitoring going on around Anchorage. All of the yellow is the National Park Service. Teal is some universities. Purple is UAA. And then this line along the North Slope is also UAA. So there's a little bit of a spattering of research coming across the state. And then the pink down here is our Southeast research history. So, I mentioned the citizen science a little bit. So this is an example of one of the bat detectors that we use. This is our tiniest one. It's called an audio moth. Most of the other ones I use are a little bit bigger. The audio moths are just kind of easier to carry into the field sometimes if you're hiking. But these would just be stationary monitors. And then we have the reporting, and then we also do roost counts. And these are great because you don't need any equipment or anything for these. But if you know of a bat roost anywhere in the state, or you know someone, they can just do a count, and it essentially means that you go out at maybe like 11 p.m. and you sort of keep an eye on the entrance to the bat colony. Sometimes it's in people's roofs or eaves or things like that, or if you have a active bat house. And then you just wait until a bat emerges for the first time, and then you count every time a bat comes out, and you keep counting until you see them start going back in. Sometimes that'll take about an hour and a half or 2 hours, so up until like 1 in the morning or so. And I've counted usually about 100 bats when I do these. I think I counted 50 on another site one time. And so these are a little difficult because you have to stay up so late, but they're you don't need any special equipment for them. Anyone can do them, so they're kind of nice. And then if the count changes drastically from year to year, that can kind of help us keep an eye on the bats and be like, oh, why did that colony suddenly decrease by half in the last year? Like, what's going on over there? Should we go check it out? And then another program that I'm in is the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And this is continent wide. And anyone can join this as long as you have the equipment and follow the proper protocol. So you can see this grid cell. This is Clutna Lake right here. And these grid cells, they have each of them have an ID, like a 6 number ID, and they cover the entire continent. And so what you can do is you can claim a grid cell that nobody else is monitoring, and you can put at least 2 bat detectors in your grid cell and then monitor it for like a 2 or so week period in July, as long as you're kind of consistent. And then it can get uploaded to the NA BAT website, and it's kind of available for anybody to see this like continent-wide data. And you can do stationary surveys or driving surveys. I have about 2 grid cells in Anchorage right now. There's 9 in Southeast. Actually, I think there might be 12. Maybe there's 12 in Southeast, and then I think there's more on the Kenai Peninsula. So we've got a few grid cells up here in Alaska. So that's something else that I do in July, along with the Citizen Science program. All right. So now I'm going to get into the interactions that I hear about bats and humans in Alaska, and then what you can do when you interact with them and how to be safe. So, like I said, they roost in human buildings quite a bit. This picture is pictures that people send me when they have a bat in their area. They can also get attacked by cats quite a bit, especially if the cat is allowed outside at night, especially in July when the baby bats are bad at flying. That's when cats will go after bats quite a bit. They cannot be harassed or killed. They're protected from that. So people can't just exterminate them if they find them in their house. You have to do an eviction. And like I kind of mentioned the disease a bit before, but if you do have bats in your house, there's not really any reason to be concerned about it. They're pretty free of disease. Rabies is very rare, like I said. And I believe there's I think it's histoplasmosis. Yeah, it's a disease that's you can get from bat guano, but it has never occurred in Alaska. It's only really in Mississippi and Ohio, so we're not worried about that up here. If bats, if they can get into your living space, like if they're flying around in your home because of a roost, that can be a problem because you don't want the bat to accidentally touch your bare skin because of that very tiny risk of rabies. So if the bat is kind of like like roosting in your eaves, but they're not getting into your house, then there's not really any reason to be concerned. And in fact, they're probably keeping the mosquitoes down in your place, and they can be nice to have around. So, if you do find a bat, though, this happens. People will find a bat like this little guy. This little guy was found just kind of like chilling behind a woodshed, sleeping through the day, I suppose. Sometimes a cat will bring a bat inside, or a dog will grab one, or you will find a bat on the ground and it's kind of flopping around. And so the first thing that you want to do is kind of assess the bat's condition. So, if they seem injured, like if they're obviously injured, like their wing has been damaged or anything like that, they do need to be brought in and we can safely euthanize them. There's not really much you can do for rehab when they're badly injured like that. And so that's kind of the best thing to do for them in those cases. If they do not seem injured, if they seem all right, but they're just kind of maybe lethargic or like looking like asleep, like this guy, or if they are kind of flopping around on the ground, then there might be something you can do. So in this case, if the bat is on the ground, bats are terrible at taking off from the ground. They really need they need some drop so they can get some lift. And so often, if they're on the ground, it's because they got there on accident, usually because they're younger, and they just can't get lift again. And so, if you put them somewhere high, like a tree trunk or a wood pile, or just somewhere that has like at least several feet of height, then that might be all they need, and they can kind of take off from there, and then they are completely fine, and you don't need to worry about them. But when you do that, the most important thing is not to touch them with your bare skin. So you can pick them up with leather gloves or like maybe with a broom handle or something like that. But just try not to touch them with your bare skin. And this is because of that slight risk of rabies, because if there's any kind of like their like mouth contact on your skin or like the mucous membrane thing, then that could be considered a rabies exposure. So it's very unlikely, like I said, but it is technically possible, and rabies is very serious with like a 99% mortality. So it's something that we just take very seriously on the very small chance that it is. So that's just why we say to people to use gloves or tools or something like that, but just don't touch them with your bare skin. This is an example of a bat that got turned in last summer. There was no human or pet contact. There was no risk of rabies exposure. The bat was not injured. They were a little bit lethargic. So if they're lethargic, that just might mean that they're dehydrated or they need some more food. So this bat, I bought some mealworms and I crushed them up and gave them to her, and then gave her a little bottle cap of water. And she went from being like just completely like comatose, like just so like still. I gave her some like mealworm juice and she started zipping around like a toddler on a coffee. Like it's kind of wild how much of a change it makes. And so I was like, okay, she's fine. And I took her out and I put her on this tree trunk and she just shot straight up the tree trunk. And I assume she kind of hid up there till night and then flew away, and she ended up being fine. So that's something you can do if you do find a bat that seems like it's being really yeah, quiet like that. But if they seem ill or anything like that, if you see the white on their face or anything like that, you can just bring them into Fish and Game. And we have a lab in Fairbanks where we test for all of these things. So we can help with all of that. And this can all go in the bat report form, again, if you do find them. And all of this information is on our Fish and Game Living with Bats page, where we also talk about having bats in your house, how you can safely evict them, some professionals you can call if you want someone who has experience to evict them. And then if you find them in your house and they're just flying around, you can kind of treat them like a spider. You just like, put a Tupperware on them and put a little card under it and take them outside and let them go. So, they usually don't cause too many problems, and they're not aggressive. They're never gonna attack people. They're usually more afraid of you than you are of them. So, yeah, usually it ends pretty well. I like this little guy. All right, so some other ways to be bat friendly. This picture here is me standing underneath a bat house and taking a photo directly up. And so these are, I believe there's about 50 bats that I counted in this colony that were all kind of resting in this box. I took this photo in May, so I assume that there was about 100 of them in July when the pups were born and started to fly. So you can build a bat house. There's a lot of instructions online. If you go to the Living with Bats page that I mentioned, we have a PDF at the very bottom that has some instructions for building bat houses in the north, if you're interested. And then if you have a snag on your property, a snag is going to be standing deadwood. As long as it's safe, it's not going to like collapse on anybody. It's kind of great to keep those up because a lot of cavity nesters will use it to roost. So that includes bats, tree swallows, chickadees, owls, woodpeckers. All of them will use that. So that's a nice habitat you can preserve. Reducing pesticides just to keep the insects going, reporting all your bat sightings. And if you can keep your house cats inside, it's even at night, or if nothing else, even in July at night when the babies are out, that can kind of help limit those interactions because then cats and dogs need to kind of get brought in and checked for rabies vaccine and that kind of thing. So it's kind of safer for the bats and the pets if they're kind of kept inside. So for the bat houses, this is a bat house that we had one of our lovely volunteers build for Potter Marsh, and it's still standing out there. And these are good if you are excluding bats from your house and you want to give them somewhere else to live because you want them to stay in the area, but you don't want them in your house anymore because maybe you have guano or something. You can build them a bat house. There's a lot of those plans on that website that I mentioned, and the link for that is also kind of right there. It's part of the National Park Service, and that's the official Northern Guide. And it can be a little bit finicky sometimes. They don't use bat houses at all in the southeast, though there's no reported successful ones. I know of at least a couple ones in South Central that are successful, so it can happen, but they need sunlight, they need, not too much wind exposure, they need maybe a little bit of distance from trees so that they're not afraid of owls. They need a lot of height, like this guy's pretty tall, and this one's painted brown to keep with to get the heat retention from the sun. So there's just like a lot of little things you can do to kind of encourage the bats to move in. But it might take a year or two, if not longer. They're just really picky sometimes, and you can't even if they don't move in, it's like it's hard to say what it is, you know? Like maybe there's just a better spot close by that they prefer. Who knows? All right, I'm about wrapping up here. I just wanted to say that we have a Facebook and Instagram account, the TED program. So if you wanted to keep up on any of the research we're doing, we have our bat research. We also have a lot of shorebird research, eagles, and pollinators, things like that, seabirds. You can follow all of that on our social media, and our field season is coming up, so I'll be posting pictures of the wetlands and things. And then I'm going to do a quick plug on our conservation stamp. That's this little guy. It's a little 3 by 3 inch sticker that we sell on the Fish and Game online store that supports fish and wildlife research and education in Alaska. There's a QR code to that page. And this is an Alaska hare. It's one of the endemic species that I mentioned. It only lives in Western Alaska in the whole world, and it's about like I think it's like 3 or 4 times bigger than a snowshoe hare. It's this massive, massive rabbit. They're kind of interesting. You guys should, if you're researching them. So yeah, looks like we're about at 45 minutes here. So if there's time for questions, I can answer a few.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. That was wonderful. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat and I will read them out. It looks like David is asking, in the lower 48 areas where WNS occurs, are some bats developing resistance to the fungus? And what is the long-term outlook for bat populations relative to WNS?
Yeah, so I believe that there is some evidence of bats having a little bit of a resistance. Dr. Merlin Tuttle, the researcher that I mentioned before, who has a website with a lot of bat research, and he's the one who kind of kickstarted a lot of the global bat research. I heard him talk about this once, where he said that he doesn't think that the white nose syndrome is going to be like an extinction risk, like it's not going to like 100% wipe out the bats. But because there is that like small percentage that does survive it. So it's not, super successful, but it does happen where bats are surviving it. So there is like a resistance that's kind of happening, but currently it's not enough to slow down the spread, but it's enough that it's kind of like, well, it's not, at least it's not like 100% wipeout, I suppose. So they are looking at a lot of solutions for white nose syndrome, but it's really hard because you can't like kill a fungus without killing a bunch of other things that already live in the cave, like native funguses and or fungi, native fungi or plants or insects. So anything that you might do to the cave to like inoculate it could hurt like really delicate cave ecosystems already. This is more on the East Coast where these caves are a lot more common. They have like, tried inoculating bats, but then if the bat goes back to an infected colony, then they'll just get infected again. So it's something that's really hard to treat, but they are definitely working on it. So it's definitely a worry and it's definitely causing a lot of damage, but there is some positive news for it where it's not completely hopeless. It's something that is, people are working on and it's not wiping things out completely. And with Alaska bats, we actually found recently, I think I touched on it earlier, but didn't go into it. The East Coast bats will have their colonies like a 3,000 bat strong. Our colonies are much smaller. They're like, 50 to 200 bats. And our bats, and it's the same species. They're all little brown bats, but they kind of like roost differently. And we have caves in Alaska, like we have some mines in the southeast and stuff. And the bats, they will roost in there, but not like exclusively. Like they'll, go find cabins or they'll go find trees or something. And so if white nose syndrome ever does get here, they would actually be a little bit safer from it because if white nose syndrome gets into a colony of 50 bats, it's not going to infect like the other 2,500, bats or 50 bats. So their small colony size here in Alaska kind of protects them a little bit from the potential of white nose syndrome, which is good news. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Barbara is asking, how can one volunteer to host a microphone for your studies?
Oh, yes. So I have my email there. I'm the one who runs the program. We don't usually have a lot of available detectors. I only have about 15 or so, and they're usually spoken for because I have people running detectors for many years. But you can always send me an email, and sometimes someone moves or, drops out and a detector becomes available. So it's always worth sending an email if you're interested in hosting a detector. You can always get one on your own if you're interested. They can be a little pricey. If you go to the website Wildlife Acoustics, they will sell this kind of equipment. Also, Tightly Research, I think, like Titley Research sells bat detectors. And so you can kind of look for them yourself if we don't have any detectors. And you can even get something that you can plug into your phone. It's like an adapter. You can go out at night and kind of have it, and it's like a little like handheld bat detector. So you can do something like that. There's a lot of things you can kind of do on your own time, and you can either send that data to us, or you can be a part of the North American Bat Monitoring Program, or you can upload your sightings to the iNaturalist website. So there's a couple different options for being involved in citizen science bat research. But yeah, just shoot me an email if you're interested. And I can't promise that there'll be an available detector, but it doesn't hurt to try. Maybe someone will come up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. I also have people asking, what other species do you work with? And if you will be giving any other presentations coming up.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice question. Thank you. So I personally work with the lesser yellowlegs, that shorebird who I showed a picture of in the beginning. They're pretty cute. They're like a small shorebird with those bright lemon yellow legs, and I study them here in Anchorage. Our field season starts in May and goes into June. And then I also study the collared pika in south-central Alaska. And the next talk that I will be giving is at the Kachemak Bay Shorebird Festival in Homer. I believe it's Friday, which I can't remember the date of Friday, May 4th, maybe? May 5th? Whatever the first Friday in May is, I'm giving a talk on yellowlegs there in Homer. So that's my next one. But if you keep an eye on the social media that I mentioned, our Instagram and Facebook for the Threatened, Endangered, and Diversity program, I post all the talks that our program gives on there. And then a lot of the folks in my program, they have a lot of other projects going on. So I have a colleague in Fairbanks. They're working on songbirds, bank swallows, olive-sided flycatchers, and golden and bald eagles, and peregrine falcons, and gyrfalcons. And then we have folks working on pollinators and red-notched shorebirds in Juneau. And yeah, just like a lot of different things going on. It's pretty interesting. It stays diverse.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone else has asked you if they have a dead bat that they found that's been in cold storage. Is that something that they can send in to you for research, or what should they do with it?
Yeah, so when you find a dead bat, we usually like to collect them for testing, because we'll just test every bat that we are able to. We'll test it for rabies and white nose syndrome and just COVID and like whatever else. But those tests are only good if the bat has been dead within 48 hours, or if the bat has never been frozen. If it's chilled in a fridge and it's within 48 hours, then that's good, and we can use that for our testing and research. So that can just be brought to any Fish and Game office, and we should have the protocols there to ship it to our lab in Fairbanks. If the bat is older than that, it's not as useful for testing when it's not as fresh. They do get desiccated a lot. They kind of dry out easily. They're so small, they dehydrate easily. So a lot of people will find like pretty like mummified bats kind of by their fireplaces or stuff sometimes. And those aren't they're not too useful for research just because the testing stuff is kind of degraded. So um, it's always worth asking, I suppose, just in case, and kind of saying what the circumstances are. Sometimes the UAF museum will take bat specimens, or if the bat is like pretty well preserved, sometimes it can be saved as an education tool. I have at least two bats in my office that I've put in a shadow box and kind of keep just to kind of show people how big they are and what they look like. So I guess if you find a dead bat, just kind of reach out and just kind of let us know the circumstances, and we can let you know if it's useful for testing or education, or if maybe it just needs to be buried in the backyard.
Awesome. Thank you. Hannah is asking if increasing temperatures are resulting in increased ranges of the little brown bat or any other new Alaska bat species, and if the irregular winters with occasional warm weather are having effects on the hibernation of bats in Alaska.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't seen a lot of super like definitive research on that, but just kind of speculating, I think Warmer temperatures could, it kind of is extending the boreal zone up into the Arctic, but the bats are already kind of in the Arctic, so that doesn't affect them as much as it would some bird species who rely on like boreal forests. It can also maybe dry up wetlands, which could affect their food sources. And I know that if there's any warm spells in the winter, it can kind of make the bats wake up. So last year we had a bat that was seen at the Eagle River Nature Center in February, which was pretty odd. It was like early February too. It was like almost a month and a half earlier than we would expect to see them. And it's because there was this big warm spell and some insects were flying around. And a ADN photographer got a picture of a bat at the Eagle River Nature Center and was like, am I crazy? Is this a bat?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a bat. I don't know what it's doing awake, but that is a bat." So I think those kinds of temperatures can kind of spur things like that. Which if there's food, like, maybe the bat would be all right, but if it kind of, makes it use up its energy storage, then, that could be a little bit detrimental. So I don't know the solid background research on that question, but that's kind of just my anecdotal answer.
Amazing. Thank you. It looks like we have another minute or two if anyone else has any last questions. Um, Again, if you came in late or you want to share this presentation with other people, we'll have it posted on our YouTube. I should have that up by tomorrow. It's just the Alaska Wildlife Alliance YouTube channel. You can find all of our past Wildlife Wednesdays there as well if you need something to watch. Um, yeah, if there's no other questions, thank you, Arin, so much. I learned so much about bats. That was amazing. I feel like I've grown up and been around bats so long, but never really knew much about them. So really appreciate it. And appreciate you sharing the citizen science projects that people can get involved in as well. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a good night. Our next and last Wildlife Wednesday of the season will be April 15th, I believe. So you can look out for that in our newsletter and our social media. We'll be um, focusing on another winged creature, birds with Bird TLC in Anchorage. They
Ooh.
rehabilitate wild birds, and they'll be talking about how to help birds through the migratory season. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.